All right, good morning. Carry on, carry on. Everybody have a seat. Are we live out there?
Someone give us a comm check, please.
One thumbs up.
Yeah, I got you.
Outstanding. Welcome to the 2023 Air Force Doctrine Symposium here at the LeMay Center. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Davison, and I welcome you, and I'm very glad that you guys are all dialed in. The numbers and the scope of folks in here shows me your commitment to getting it done and getting it done right. I appreciate your commitment to the mission. It's a big deal. Your dedication is huge. However, commitment without competence or competence alone can lead to all kinds of shenanigans. So we need guidance. We all need guidance. That's what our mission is, guidance. And that's what we do here, is to develop doctrine. Even the renegades and the mavericks in our midst need that guidance, because they need to know what boundaries to push and what to rebel against. So we need guidance. And if my video and our technology is good here, we'll thank Todd for this and the team for putting this together. Let me just walk up here to the
Walk
The aisle over
towards
here.
the flag. Yeah.
come over here.
There we go.
So if you guys can see this, you can do your own poll with the chats, what it is. This is guidance. My wife and I bought this in San Antonio when we built the theater in our house, because it was old movies. We were gonna use them as props on the wall, and we were intrigued. We get to looking at it. It's the AN/ASQ 42. It's guidance. Specific guidance for the B-58, 1962. And it's just little dots on paper, and there was a computer system that read that. That provided specific guidance for the directional system on that aircraft, that bomber. On what to do, how to do it, where to go. That's old technology. That's the way it was. Nowadays, your watch has more power than that. On the E3 in the 2000s, we used to say that your watch had more computing power than the E3 itself, but it has been upgraded. And I've got an ABM in the class here, or in the group here, nodding his head with enthusiasm. Our team has taken this guidance and we've reduced it down to where it's digestible, it's accessible for the most part, it's available. If you don't have the guidance and you can't get the guidance, you can't understand the guidance, it's not doing you any good. So the next few hours, you guys are going to get some Doctrine 101. You're going to hear about hot topics in doctrine, what we're doing, podcasts, videos, essay contests, reducing doctrine down to where it's something usable. You go from 498 pages down to about 200, down to what is now, I think, 16 pages. We just came out with a smart book late last year. It is a summation of each of the 33 Air Force doctrine documents. And it originally was 8.5 by 11. It's still not good enough. QR code on the back, so you can access it with any device that can read a QR code. And now we've got it to where it'll fit in the pocket of your OCPs or your flight suit. Ready to go when you need it. That's what we're doing. So this symposium today, and thank you, Guardians, for logging in. I really appreciate that. The symposium today is for that. Get you guys in doctrine, know what's going on, make some contacts, have relevant current update briefs, and move forward. So I welcome you. I'm glad that you're logged in. I think it's time very much well spent. I wish you could be here. We probably saved about $50,000 if you're not, and we'll deal with the technology as long as Todd can keep it working and the AFDD doesn't block us. So thank you. And with that, I'll hand it over.
Thank you, sir. Let's go ahead and pull a few slides forward. This is our agenda today. We've got the time blocked for about 4 hours. Depending on how inquisitive each of you is, will determine whether the entire time is needed. Hint, hint. If you go on to the next slide, we've already completed the opening remarks. Thank you again, sir. That is the coolest prop. The recording tape. Now we're going to start with an update to let you all know what is happening around here. One of the things that we do want to do pretty much every time we do something in Doctrine is a reminder briefing on Doctrine 101, what Doctrine is, and often just as important, what Doctrine is not. So for those of you who have been in the Doctrine community for quite some time, I'm not going to apologize for your having to sit through it again, but do please feel free to nod off during this. The rest of you, please pay remarkably close attention because you should be able to pick up a few tidbits, some bon mots, and some other remarkable witticisms that you can then use when you present the Doctrine 101 information to all of the personnel you'll be working with. So let's go ahead and get started with the next slide. Doctrine 101. Here is why we are called the LeMay Center. When you visit us, you'll see the phrase "at the very heart of warfare lies doctrine" all over the place. General LeMay had it right, and that's why we want to continue to emphasize his presence. He lingers over us like a grand poobah, providing us with actually the way he usually looks, more fear than anything else. But the point being, he had doctrine correct, understood it, and we have attempted to take it forward from his baselines that he provided airmen ever since he was in the Air Force. Next slide. We'll often be asked, okay, what is this doctrine thing of which you speak? Well, this is what doctrine is. It's essentially all about organization and employment. It's the agreed upon best practices and principles. That language, by the way, is going to be incorporated in the updated version of our policy document, AFI 1013-01, which should be coming out within the next 30 to 60 days. How do we know that this doctrine is constituted of the best practices and principles? Because we've studied it, we have researched it. We have roughly 300,000 subject matter experts, you among them, who can tell us what is a current best practice and what is not. We've got history to go by. We debate it and analyze it. We have the inestimable pleasure of having Air Force lessons learned right across the hallway in the building we operate out of. So we participate with and attend with them various exercises, war games, some real world contingencies. We support them by helping their collections. They support us by allowing us to obtain new doctrinal information that we can most effectively use. By order of the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, doctrine is to be considered as official advice. The phrase "doctrine is authoritative but not directive" is still relevant, it is still accurate, but if someone asks you what is doctrine, the two-word phrase to use, please, is official advice. Some background on this particular briefing: the information used to be completely incorporated into our predecessor to AFDP 1, which was called Volume 1. And that information is still on our website. It's in the upper left corner of the main page. If you click on the Doctrine Primer, you'll find a much more detailed discussion of this. In addition, on our website, if you scroll to the bottom, there is a link to something called a quick introduction to doctrine, which is essentially these slides. So if you need to use these or would like to use them, please feel free. Plagiarism being a very sincere form of flattery, we are more than happy to let you use them. In fact, you can also, if you don't want to be the talking head, there is a video on our website that you can also click on that provides essentially the same information. Highly recommended. Well done. Good job, Todd. Next slide. Why is doctrine important? What's its value to us? Well, it provides us a guide on how do you go about organizing, presenting, deploying, and employing forces. Think of doctrine as an opportunity. When you were in college, all of us are college graduates. We know how to take 10 pages of research and squeeze it into a 20-page paper. So instead of having to start with a blank tabula rasa, if you use doctrine, it allows you to edit You can take something that previously exists, that is known, that is proven, and you can go from there. It's a whole lot easier to edit than it is to create from scratch. And that's one of the key values doctrine provides us. Doctrine in the Air Force discusses key pillars in the doctrine. One is a principle of war, which is now in joint doctrine referred to as a principle of joint operations, unity of command. We like to know who works for whom, and every one of us should be able to enunciate who we work for. Take a brief slip down to the third major bullet there, and as a reminder, and this is encapsulated in the first chapter of the AFDP 1, that airmen work for airmen, and that senior airman, who is now referred to as the Air Component Commander, works for the JFC, for the Joint Force Commander. And that is how we provide unity of command for the personnel in our service. The other key pillar of doctrine, going back up to the second bullet, is one of the tenets of air power. The new key tenet of air power that is discussed again in AFDP 1 is mission command. You'll be hearing more about that in the course of today's discussions, because we are in the process of elucidating more accurately for the service what is mission command. You'll be hearing more about that later. And finally, doctrine is normally the best way to proceed. And normally, as an adverb, is a very, I heard that.
There went the train.
I'm trying to find, just derailed. Anyway, doctrine is normally the best way to proceed. The adverb normally is a very doctrinal word because, again, it is authoritative, but it is not directive. It is official advice, not official mandates. So if you deviate, that's perfectly fine. You can deviate from doctrine. If you do so, however, you should be able to enunciate a clear and compelling operational reason for doing so, because you really don't want the Joint Force Commander looking at the Air Component Commander and saying, your doctrine said you were supposed to do it this way, you didn't. Why? So this allows you to be able to ensure you've read your doctrine, you understand it, and if you deviate, you can explain why you are deviating. Next slide. Why bother to learn this stuff? Well, the key thing is that it provides language. Words are us. Doctrine provides the common language that is absolutely vital for communication in any form. If I talk to a cohort from the United States Army or the United States Space Force, of which we have members in the room right now, if I use the word OPCON, every one of us knows exactly what that means. And if he or she doesn't, then I will point that person to JP1 Vol 2 and slap them on the wrist and ensure that they've read it. Because the language that's provided in doctrine gives us a foundation of communicability that is utterly invaluable to what we do for a living. Doctrine is also something that provides us how we best employ and organize air power. What's the operational suitability of what we're doing? Doctrine can help you out with that. Doctrine does have the ability to impact the future, emerging capabilities, future capabilities. We'll talk a little bit about concepts and emerging doctrine shortly, but doctrine has the ability to influence that directly. And finally, doctrine provides consistency and teachability. A Marine officer was going through ACSC some few years ago and made the comment, yeah, those doctrine center guys are the ones who build the box that we're encouraged to think outside of. And he was exactly correct. That's what we do. Next slide, please. We also need to understand what doctrine is, and in many cases, what it is not. Doctrine, overarchingly at the operational level, which is what is produced here at the LeMay Center, is all about warfighting. It is not about physics. We really, in doctrine, don't particularly care if a weapon system is going to be operated on by the Bernoulli effect or by the Keplerian effect. That's not particularly relevant to us because doctrine is about effects. We don't really worry in doctrine about which weapon system is going to be used. Yes, we will discuss individual weapon systems within our doctrine, but more often than not, it's exclusively for the purpose of illustration. because overwhelmingly doctrine is about effects. There is a very, very cogent and concise discussion of the effects-based approach to operations, EBAO, in our AFDP 3.0 operations and planning. Highly recommended if you'd like to learn a little bit more about it. It is not what General Mattis detested some few years ago, EBO. That was sold to him inaccurately. He has since that time come around and understands exactly that the effects-based approach to operations is what we all do for a living and is accurate and correct. Doctrine is about using the domains. Now, domains, currently there are 5 that are identified in joint doctrine: airspace, cyberspace, land, and maritime. There have been other efforts and attempts to bring other things in. The electromagnetic spectrum has been discussed about possibly being a domain. The human domain has been discussed as well, but currently there are only 5. I mention that simply to point out that nobody owns a domain. It's not impossible. It's not possible to own the air. It's not possible to own the land that we're operating on. It is possible for a commander to be able to provide command and control authority over those forces operating in a domain. So we use domains, we don't own them. Doctrine is all about how we go about organizing to be most effective and efficient for an operation. We are not about individual organizations. One of the disadvantages of discussing specific organizations in doctrine outside of perhaps some examples is it does tend to date the pub. We originally had in one of our pubs a discussion of the Air Force ISR agency, AFISRA. Well, that died a lingering death and became 25th Air Force. Well, 25th Air Force hung around a while, was consolidated with 24th Air Force. They didn't take our suggestion and renamed it 49th Air Force, but instead they chose to call it 16th Air Force. So again, names are not as important as the organization overarchingly. We are here and willing, capable, and desirous of ensuring that when your 3-star gets the 2 a.m. call and says, hey, you're going to be the air component commander for Operation Fill in the Blank, he or she routinely has in the past, and hopefully will continue to do so, sent us an initial org chart to allow us to take a look and give them a sanity check on it. We're more than happy to assist with that because that's what we do for a living. The last 3 things that doctrine is go together: synergy, integration, and the right force. It's not about segregating the capabilities as working together. It's about integrating the capabilities of the joint force of which each of us is a part. It's not just about deconfliction in time and space, which synchronization entails. And finally, it's the right force for what needs to be done. This is no longer 1982 Grenada, where each of the force services was given 25% of the operation, and the result was rather pitiable, with Clint Eastwood lying on a hilltop saying, Jones, just because you're leaning over me doesn't mean you were going to be taking warm showers into the wee hours of the morning. And if you haven't seen the movie Heartbreak Ridge, I highly recommend it. Next slide. One of the hearts of this particular briefing is the next set of slides, and that is a discussion of the difference and the interrelationship of these terms. Remember, words are us: policy, strategy, and doctrine. Let's start with policy. Policy is directive. It sets overall priorities at the national level, at the macro level. It defines our national interests, stating what the political direction and the guiding principles are that for an operation we are going to have to comply with. One of the key things policy does going into an operation is it establishes limits. It bounds the response. For example, rules of engagement are policy. Law is policy. Title 10, for example, is policy, all of which will give us limitations. It's directive guidance determined by our senior leadership, and compliance is mandatory. When you are dealing with policy, you are indeed a member of the board collective. Resistance is futile. You will comply. It sets the boundaries going into an operation within which doctrine and strategy are intended to operate. A couple of examples there, just live and in captivity, just to help explain what we're talking about when we talk about policy. Strategy is all about applying our capabilities to gain the ends that we need to do using the means that have been approved for our use within the environment that we've been handed. There are lots of considerations that go into the establishment and the execution of a strategy. The objectives, what is the threat that we're dealing with? What are the politics involved, not only in the nation state we may be operating within, but also back here in the United States? Personalities and public opinion play a key element of how we build our strategies. There are many organizations that we'll work with. Alliances are vitally important, as are treaty organizations, as well as private PVOs, private volunteer organization, and NGOs, other government agencies we're going to have to work with. We used to have a copy of the State Department booklet on how to be a State Department weenie. And remember, defense is from Mars, state is from Venus. And there was an entire chapter dedicated in the State Department booklet on how State Department personnel should be dealing with the military. The military expects people to be on time and to be organized and to form up at certain times. Now, we don't operate that way in the State Department, but if you have to deal with the military, don't forget how they act. So we have to understand their mindset just as much as we would like them to understand ours. The other consideration for how to build and execute a strategy include what are our current capabilities and doctrine. How does the doctrine that exists allow us to configure our strategy to be most effective in being able to accomplish what we need to do? And again, some examples at the bottom just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. We've already discussed what doctrine is, all about organization, employment, the presentation of forces, C2, command relationships, huge aspect of what we do for a living. The agreed upon best practices and principles. The main takeaway off this slide on what doctrine is the third bold blue underlined foot stomp statement that doctrine is not dogma. Yes, if you go to any thesaurus in print or online, normally the very first synonym given for the word doctrine is going to be dogma. However, within the United States military, and this applies to all of the military services as well as the joint doctrine construct, doctrine is not fixed and immutable, which is what dogma is. Doctrine is very changing. We have to be able to change it. Otherwise, how would I have job security? But in addition, the ability to ensure that we are providing the most accurate and current best practices to be able to perform our mission. Next slide. And here is probably the single most important slide, and that's how each of these interrelates to each other. Policy governs the use of force and shapes the strategy going into an operation, and it may limit and affect how doctrine is used. As I mentioned before, ROE being policy that over the previous 20 years in Southwest Asia has caused many limitations on how we are able to execute our doctrine because the policy has limited us. Doctrine, on the other hand, provides us that knowledge base and can learn new things based on how a strategy or how policy has caused us to work. So doctrine can be affected by both strategy and policy going into an operation. But coming out of an operation, doctrine also has the ability to go back to the policy authors and say, here's what happened with our doctrine because we were not allowed to use it. We recommend you may consider rethinking what the policy says regarding this particular activity. And the same holds true with strategy. How well or how poorly a strategy operates can be affected by what policy has limited them to be capable of doing going into an operation and what doctrine says or recommends you can or cannot do. But again, coming out of an operation, strategy can be used to identify a new best practice affecting doctrine, or can go back to the policy writers and say, this is what your policy caused us to happen, and they influence the rewrite of policy. So if you ask which is the most important policy or strategy or doctrine, the correct answer is yes. Next slide. Concepts. There is a current and appropriate effort to ensure that concepts are reflected accurately and effectively in doctrine. with a caveat, with a very large caveat, and that is that concepts are not yet doctrine. They are unproven, they are not authoritative yet. However, they can be used in a discussion within doctrine to point out that something is being created that may affect doctrine in the future. We also use a term, emerging doctrine. That is where we will attempt to capture something we know that is being worked, that is being exercised, that is being analyzed, and we anticipate in the foreseeable near future is going to probably become a grand source of best practice for us to incorporate into our doctrine. For example, Joint All-Domain Operations and JAD C2. We are in the process, and the Air Force is doing a tremendous amount of effort in agile combat employment, particularly USAF and PACAF, to try to build those to make them determinable to see if those are indeed going to become a best practice. Once they are shown to be such, that information will then be incorporated into the doctrine as a best practice. Mission Command, we're in the early phases of discussing of much of what that's going to be. Again, we'll hold the discussion on Mission Command for a little bit because we'll be discussing that a little bit later. And as a reminder, doctrine is extant employment, extant capabilities, extant this, that, and the other thing, because we know it's a best practice from the past. Doctrine is backward looking. Concepts are future looking. We're standing right in the middle and need to make sure that we balance them appropriately. These are the venues that we at the LeMay Center and you as doctrine POCs and members of the doctrine community throughout the whole Air Force deal with. We'll start smack dab in the middle with the 30 Air Force doctrine publications plus additional doctrine notes and a couple of policy documents that are all available on the website listed there. If you are looking for any form of doctrine that we deal with, whether it's other service doctrine, whether it's joint doctrine, whether it's Air Force doctrine, TTPs, you name it, that is your one-stop shop. All you have to remember is doctrine.af.mil. It'll take you straight to the website. Kudos to our website manager, Mr. Todd Self, who has made sure that that is as usable and as user-friendly a website as I can recall taking advantage of. So please use it to your heart's content. The service doctrine division deals with what there is there in the middle. Our joint and multinational doctrine division deals with the top left, the joint doctrine. The number of pubs varies because they are attempting to slim down their library, and it does most emphatically need to go on a diet, as well as our multinational doctrine, which comes in many flavors. Overwhelmingly, the key one, of course, is NATO doctrine. Last count was 2,000, 3,000 pubs, 3,000 publications of NATO doctrine. Thankfully, we don't do a line-by-line, page-by-page review of every single one of those, although that would certainly be job security for quite some time to come. Anyway, we do deal with that, but that's not the only source of multinational doctrine. We have multinational doctrine with the 5 Eyes, and we have some binational doctrine as well. So there's a lot of work there. We create and write the stuff in the middle. We take that information and use it to influence the joint doctrine and the multinational doctrine. On below us, and that's only in the command and control pyramidal construct, there's nothing lesser about TTPs at all. They're vitally important. We have multiple flavors of those. We have the Air, Land, Sea, Space Application Center, and as Colonel Davison has mentioned, they missed a grand opportunity by not adding, because it's the newest service to be added to ALSA's responsibility, the abbreviation should have become Space Air, Land, Sea Applications, making it SALSA. But I'm sorry, boss. Sorry, boss.
I have no influence, I can tell.
They produce multi-service TTPs, which are primarily used by the services for which it's most relevant. Joint doctrine produced at the J7, everybody has to sign on to. Again, you remember the board collective if you are in the service when it comes to joint doctrine. With ALSA, there is a greater ability to focus the publications on those services that use them most effectively. Highly valuable organization, dates back to 1975 after the Vietnam War to capture a lot of the tactical warfighting experiences of the time. It's an outstanding organization. And again, their website is accessible from doctrine.af.mil. And then we have multiple flavors of Air Force TTPs, which we'll get to in just a second. Again, the types of doctrine, we've got service doctrine, every service plus the U.S. Coast Guard, who, while currently under the Department of Homeland Security, can in certain circumstances become supportive of operations within the Department of Defense, just like the drivers of many of the LCTs during the Normandy landing were actually Coast Guardsmen, not sailors. Gee whiz info. I learned that looking at Saving Private Ryan and researching a little of that. Anyway, the joint doctrine, as all of us hopefully are familiar with, provides the overarching Big Daddy Rabbit information regarding command relationships and authority, guidance for use of those command authorities, the fundamental overarching principles for command and control, and then guidance for how you go about organizing the joint force. And we provide our service input into it to ensure that each service is accurately portrayed. The multi-service doctrine, chiefly the ALSA information, 2 or more services approved by the service reps. Each service provides the senior commander for that doctrine's organization to a biannual, twice a year, twice a year meeting, the Joint Action Steering Committee. So in the case of the United States Air Force, Major General Holt, who is in charge of doctrine, who is the principal agent for doctrine and lessons learned to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, represents the Air Force. The STARCOM commander will represent doctrine for the Space Force. And I believe is it the CAB commander for the Army? The CAB commander for the Army represents it for them. This is normally written at the tactical level. It is TTPs, which are brought into each service as a service TTP. The multinational doctrine we've already discussed. NATO, no, that's not a typo. The bilingual nature of NATO being English and French. So we've got to write OTAN. That always freaks people out when they see it on an airplane. But they have a ton of stuff. The Air Force and we at the LeMay Center represent often just the Air Force, but more often than not, the United States military to NATO events, such as the Air Force Interoperability Council and the JCG UAS, Joint Something Group UAS. I always forget what the C is, but it's one of the organizations that we represent the United States military at to represent us in multinational doctrine. Next. This is just a screen capture, a quick slide of what our website looks like. Next slide. Here is a screen capture at the time of what joint doctrine looks like. These are both of theirs and ours are obviously in a state of constant flux, which we'll be discussing by the division chiefs shortly. Next slide. Here are the levels of service doctrine. AFDP 1, the Air Force is signed by General Brown and his successors. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force signs them. General Brown has delegated the authority to sign the other operational doctrine publications produced at the LeMay Center to the commander of the LeMay Center in his status as the principal agent for doctrine and lessons learned to the Chief of Staff. And finally, tactical doctrine, like Gall, tactical doctrine is divided into 3 parts. The MTTPs, the multi-service TTPs at ALSA, 561st Weapons Squadron at Nellis produces weapon system TTPs, the 3-1 and 3-3 series, which if you wear wings, you've lived in, and please God, don't die by in your chosen career path. And support TTPs can be produced by the 423rd Mobility Training Squadron at Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst, as well as by a MAJCOM or by an Air Staff office, if appropriate. Basic doctrine, the Air Force, foundational, elemental, big picture, slow to change. It will normally take us anywhere from 5 to 9 years for any major updates to AFDP 1 and its predecessors, which is exactly as it should be. If it changes too quickly, then it's not very fundamental. So we try to keep it on the shelf because we know that it's baseline good. Next slide. The other stuff we produce here, the operational doctrine takes those principles elucidated in AFDP 1 and applies them to specific types of military action, whether it is special operations, counter air, force protection, or combat support, or whatever the particular subject happens to be, guiding the proper organization employment within those contexts that you see here about the objectives, the capabilities, functional areas, and the environment. It gives a focus. The operational doctrine gives a focus that is then executed down at the tactical level. Deliberate internal debate is needed, which is where all of you 300,000 subject matter experts in the field provide us the most valuable resource that we have available to be able to ensure that we're capturing the information correctly. TTPs, we've already talked about them, proper employment of specific assets with considering things like the objectives and the conditions you're working. Because they are very often closely associated with weapon system, they have the ability to change more rapidly. Doctrine provides overarchingly a description of our operations across the domains that we need, where we need to achieve effects throughout the entire competition continuum, which is discussed more explicitly within joint doctrine. There's a joint doctrine note on the competition continuum if you want more detail, informing the air component commander and his or her staff on how you best organize, plan, support, and fight with warfare, providing guidance again throughout that whole continuum. It's an expression of the airman's perspective. We as airmen think differently. We think in a co-located manner with our counterparts in the other services, but we need to know what the Air Force does best so that we can explain it and use it most effectively. We integrate with the joint team and with our sister services, but we use those basic tenets of air power in order to do so. Focusing on the air component commander keeps our discussion of operational doctrine at that level. And as a reminder, the term air component commander is the current term that describes the dual-hatted nature of the individual who is the commander of Air Force forces, the COMAFOR, who will normally always be dual-hatted as the Joint Force Air Component Commander, the JFAC. So the COMAFOR/JFAC equals Air Component Commander. The doctrine is for the Air Component Commander and his or her staff. It allows them to be able to build what they need to do to be able to support the Joint Force Commander and the Joint Force in a joint operation. One caveat, the second major bullet here, is as a reminder, because of the operational warfighting focus, everything the Air Force does is not going to have its own operational level doctrine publication. We do not write doctrine to highlight the relevancy of specific career fields or, as I mentioned earlier, specific organizations. For example, the civil engineer community did an outstanding job building the engineer operations doctrine publication, but it's not a mission directive for the civil engineers. It is, what does the air component commander need to know about what engineers are capable of providing him or her? So it was written in a very distinct manner to be able to do that. That's how operational doctrine should be written. We desperately try not to write doctrine to justify programmatics. As a former LeMay Center commander said, we don't write doctrine to justify the F-22. If doctrine is used on Capitol Hill to say, doctrine says we need to do something a specific way, and we on the air staff believe that the best way to do it is to purchase this system, that's perfectly fine, and that's exactly what should be done. But we're not going to put into operational doctrine, the Air Force should buy 389,217 more F-35s. We also desperately try not to write doctrine to capture the buzzwords or catchphrases of the moment. Yes, we are more sinned than sinned against in that circumstance, but we try to avoid it wherever possible because those don't age particularly well. And if doctrine is to be best practices, those are not always the best practice. Next slide. And I will now stop bloviating and open it up to any questions anyone might have regarding the baseline of doctrine. Thank you very much for your attention. For those of you who have heard this before, you can wake up again.
dial in from my bed. That's true.
There's 23 people.
Barring any questions, I will then turn this over to Lieutenant Colonel Cliff Mosley, who is the Service Doctrine Division Chief, to give you an update on the service doctrine.
Hey, thank you, Bob. Good morning or afternoon, whatever's applicable for you. My name is Cliff Mosley. I'm one of the newest members to the Doctrine Development Team as your Chief of Service Doctrine. So your Service Doctrine Development Team is responsible for developing, disseminating, advocating, and maintaining service operational doctrine. Our doctrine specialists are the principal agents who, like Bob 3 said, was Major General William Hope. We are his custodians and action officers who coordinate directly with field doctrine representatives for updates, regular meetings, and biannual reviews. So we maintain 30 doctrine publications with 1 doctrine note in development. And as you can currently see by the snapshot, we have almost 60% of our service doctrine publications, and the 2 on the bottom right and the second column are two policy documents that are currently in the review process as of January. Next slide, please. We've had 2 recent successes with publication of AFDD 3-12, 3-13, and the policy document 10-13. Some specifics about 3-12, this culminated a 2-year effort involving 2 rounds of coordination with the field and a last-minute alignment with the new JP 3-12. And it marked the first update for this pub since November of 2011. For 3-13, Information and Air Force Operations, this culminated a 2-year effort involving 4 rounds of spirited coordination to the field with dozens of general officer level critical comments, and then two additional writing groups. And as published, this document was first updated, or this was the first update since 2015. Now, as you can see there in that column, we have four doctrine publications soon to open, and we'll start in the review process. Now, with the emerging concepts, as Bob 3 just talked about, doctrine shouldn't be static, but at the same time, it shouldn't be subject to fads or winds. So until a concept is investigated and proven, we have 3 doctrinal publications called Air Force Doctrine Notes to present some common fundamental guidance on concepts at the initiation phase of the doctrine development process. Once existing and validated, these practices and procedures are common across the operating forces. These appropriate principles and guidance may get incorporated into Air Force doctrine. Please note that the guidance in Air Force doctrine notes, that is not authoritative, and we have the 1 doctrine note on mission command in the initiation phase, and then 1 published as of August 22, which is ACE. Now, the last thing I just want to highlight for your attention is the new doctrine publication template. The new templates that we will begin migrating all of the doctrine publications to. This template returns to the chapter book layout, eliminates in-text hyperlinks and hyperlink footnotes with standardized footnotes references, and a reference appendix to serve as a single location for hyperlinks of the sources identified within the publication.
Got a question, sir. Is AFDP 3-05 scheduled to open soon?
To the field, yes, it's currently in its final stages of internal review. So yeah, we anticipate getting that one out to the field for comment very, very shortly. And without any other questions, I'll turn it over to back to Chris
Sherman.
Sure.
Sherman, if you're online.
I am up. Good morning, folks. This is Greg Illiland. Some of you guys know me as Sherman out there. I am the Joint Multinational Doctrine Division Chief. Got a small handful of folks that actually work that particular doctrine. Highly experienced, but there's only about 4 of us that actually do joint and multinational doctrine. And at any given point, we've got about 17 open taskers between NATO, joint, and also publications. Could you go ahead and advance the slide for me? Thank you. So here's a quick snapshot of some of the documents that we have in coordination right now, and realize they're in various stages of coordination, from author's draft to harmonization and ratification drafts on NATO documents. As you see on the left, like I said, just a short list of those. There's a lot more that are open. I tried to highlight, which I guess that slide didn't make it in here. Thought it did. Some of the key ones that they're coming under revision right now on the joint side that I feel you need to be aware of is JP1 Vol 1, the joint force. It's under a LIMDIS review right now, but this publication is going to make some fundamental changes to the way U.S. joint forces operate from phase 0 through the competition continuum to armed conflict. I would ask that you pay a little bit of attention to that. JP 330 right now is also in the author's revision right now before it comes out for coordination. That, of course, is joint air operations. That is pretty near and dear to us in the Air Force side, because that has a lot of Air Force equities involved in that particular document. And another one is JP 360 joint targeting. So those are some ones I want you to pay attention to. Joint targeting is out there, and there's a lot of concepts that are being interwoven in these joint documents coming from above. So it doesn't hurt if you call these things out for us on the comment resolution matrix, so that we know that we've got support on the Air Force side when me or my guys go and advocate for Air Force equities at the joint, multinational, NATO level. So look for those, if you will, out there. The JP1 Vol 1, like I said, please pay attention to that one. It's actually not on this slide. Like I said, it's LIMDIS. But this is the one that is bringing in competition continuum and global integration. And as I said, there's a lot of concepts in there. There's a lot of things that are floating around. And to tell you the truth, it's hard for us to keep track of some of these that are being circulated around out there. Also, that's not on this slide is Joint Doctrine Note 1-22 has been published as of 2 February. It's Joint Force in the Strategic Competition. An interesting little joint doctrine note. I know that Bob 3 gave you the download on what a joint doctrine note is. It's not doctrine, it's concept. It's not authoritative. It's these good ideas. So it hasn't made it into doctrine yet. And I emphasize that word yet because I don't know if I've seen any joint doctrine notes die on the vine. But I'm sure there's some out there. I just haven't seen it. Some of the other interesting things for joint for you to be aware of is the ALSA MTTP on unmanned aircraft systems has been rescinded. So if that was near and dear to your heart, don't look for coordinating on that anytime soon. Some of the other options that will be documents that will be coming up for review soon. I know somebody asked a question on AFDP 3.05 Special Operations. That also will be coming up for revision, the JP, the joint publication on that. I would expect that somewhere around the summer timeframe. JP 5.0 and JP 336 mobility and sea lift. Not sure if we have any air mobility folks out there, but I'm going to need your help working on that. And then JP 85, which is electronic warfare, will also be coming up too. So pay attention for those. Then one of the other ones that's been a thorn in our side for many years is JP 314 Space Ops. So look for that one to come out there, and that'll tie a big bow, hopefully, on the space operations. for us. Two final things for you. Barney, any questions? You might see a email come out to me, at least to your POCs in your organizations, looking for good SMEs with SIPR access. I bring this up because there's several publications on the joint side that are going to have some classified annexes. Don't get me started on how I feel about classified annexes, but we're going to have a couple that are coming out, and they're going to range everything from 3.0 operations to logistics to 360 targeting. So I'm going to send out a distro probably here shortly and asking for those kind of POCs. So I'll also highlight the documents that that are possibly going to have these classified annexes, so that you can figure out who the appropriate SME is for those particular ones. And I'll make it clear in the email. I want to know who's more appropriate for 360 from your organization, as opposed to who's more appropriate for 3.0. So we can have a really good targeted email, and but yet get qualified SMEs to respond to these taskings, because we don't manage and maintain a SIPR list of POCs out there that we can reach out to on the SIPR. So something we're going to have to create on this side. We're just going to need your help. And then the final thing, if you guys have been out on looking for joint pubs, you probably noticed that most of the joint pubs are moving behind the Gel Plus security, if you will. You're not going to find very many pubs left on just straight up Gel. So just realize that. I know we've had some questions, not recently, but when they started doing that, people couldn't find publications because they were using old links. Just realize that they're all on Gel Plus now. So with that, I think that's a quick snapshot of what's going on in Joint Multinational Doctrine. Are there any questions out there? Todd, I'm relying on you to tell if there's any questions.
You can open your own chat window. No, there's no questions for you. We do have a question that we're going to go back to service doctrine. I think Bob 3 is going to address. Mr. Parrish asked, can you explain emerging concepts and doctrine note link?
Thanks for the question. That's a good one. The emerging concepts are farther basic. The simplistic answer is concepts are farther into the future. A doctrine note captures what I mentioned earlier as emerging doctrine. Think of emerging doctrine as the 5-meter concept and emerging concepts as the 25-meter one. There's a pretty good discussion of each of the terms, concepts and emerging doctrine, in our doctrine primer, which is on the main webpage in the top left corner. So if you would like or need some language to help describe it to your coworkers and fellow doctrine advocates, I'd recommend that. But an emerging concept is long-term, and we try not to put it into doctrine except as a vignetted description of something that we're looking at for potential future discussion. Emerging doctrine is the information that is already being worked actively by the service and will normally now be captured in one of our service doctrine notes. I hope that clarifies that a little bit.
All right, looks like I'm up. Good morning, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Andy Boguski, I go by Walla, and I'm joined by a team of 3 other folks that make up Doctrine Outreach. So I actually want to start at the bottom of the slide. A quote from General Brown, where he's basically charging every airman to know and understand doctrine in order to be able to appropriately execute it, but more importantly, to challenge it and improve it. So going back to the top, our basic mission in outreach is to preach the good news, as it were, of doctrine and Air Force doctrine in particular. This is a challenge, particularly in the Air Force, compared to the other services. Just because we don't embrace doctrine as much culturally speaking. We're very good at tactical doctrine, as Bob has mentioned with 3-1s, 3-3s, our TTPs and knowing that. But we don't even call it tactical doctrine, we just call it TTPs. As far as operational doctrine goes, we're a little bit behind the power curve, and we'd like to change that. To do that, we want to make it more accessible, more understandable, just easier to get to, and easier to understand. How we do that in the outreach, we've got several different LOEs out there. One of the main ones we do is a podcast, and there are 2 series in this. And if you look up Air Force Doctrine podcast on Apple or wherever, Spotify or Amazon, you'll be able to find it. We've partnered with SOS to do a Deciphering Doctrine series, and we'll take captains who apply for an elective to work with us, and they'll take a doctrine concept and break it down at a CGO type level or more practical concept for application level. And then we have a newer series, Lessons Learned in Doctrine, where for example, the recent one, it's not out yet, but if you want to look for it, it's going to discuss the lessons learned in the Afghanistan exit. So there shouldn't be too contentious, but should be interesting because it was recent, and lots of lessons learned from that. We have another effort going on right now that just kicked off. It's an essay contest, where we want folks to look at the next 10 years of the changing nature, the changing character of war, and what doctrine needs to be updated or new doctrine incorporated to deal with those changes. There's a $1,000 prize, submissions due 28th of April. And all of this, of course, you can find on our website. Links to the podcast, links to the essay contest, all the doctrine, as well as videos. So that's another thing we do, is produce videos such as the Emerging Doctrine on ACE, Mission Command, where we just, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a video is worth even more, just to see what that concept is. And it's a good resource for you and your folks if you want to just give a quick primer on what ACE is, just a quick snapshot. Mention the website. We do social media to promote everything that we do. If a new doctrine comes out, such as or revision 3-12, 3-13, we'll put that out so people are aware of it and can get to it. And then we attend conferences like AFA, where we can hand out the AFDP 1 small books and the smart books that we produced. We have in limited numbers, but we carry those with us personally to those conferences. So if you're at AFA, please stop by the AU booth and say hi to us. Get some free doctrine swag. Barring any questions, that's all I have for outreach. Thanks.
If anybody has any questions, you can either put them in chat or feel free to unmute and come up and speak your question too.
If Lieutenant Colonel Dana Norris, our Army liaison, is on. Dana, it's your opportunity to talk a little bit about your position, and that'll be followed by Justin Cunningham, who will describe how he does similar activities for the United States Space Force. Are you online, Dana?
Yes.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you for the great community. I'd like to say good morning to everyone. So I'm not going to insult anyone's intelligence by reiterating what's on the slide. Please, by all means, reference the slide and read over it. Within my 5 minutes of time, I'm just going to bring a little bit of clarity and discuss the Army's role and what I do and whom I answer to more so. So there's another little box I have there, and it talks about what the Army's body role of knowledge when it comes to doctrine itself. So my job here at the LeMay Center, I am the Army's representative, the lead agent, so to speak. Which there are some things that I'm really the subject matter expert, and all others I do know the point of contacts within the Army to assist the Air Force with its doctrine development. Within that, though, I have to make clear that the way that the Center for Doctrine Directorate within the Army, how they perform their role is pretty much explained within that roles of doctrine that you may see. The caveat that I have on the actual my slide itself. It discusses the 6 major roles of doctrine and how the Army comes to a concise measure of, hey, what needs to be in doctrine and how it needs to be presented. So with that, I'd like to say that, for one, the Mission Command Center of Excellence, the proponent for the command and warfighting function, conducts this using a .mil PFP. And of course, with the .mil D being doctrine itself, to basically identify, develop, integrate, and tries to synchronize all those requirements for the best practice and solution to put out to the field, so those commanders can use this information for ongoing conflicts, if so. Now, CAD's job in all this is to ensure that Army doctrine is clearly written, is relevant, is concise. It brings a current possible productive integration of the most recent lessons learned, provides results and validates concepts with emerging technologies. And this is how we, within the Army, we develop our doctrine. And it was mentioned prior that, recreating a will is use what you already have. And that's what we like to do, provide that homogeneity where we're more so helping not just the joint community, but helping, the Air Force and Marines and Navy, whomever it may be. And if there's something that you have, like I know the Air Force actually has a 313, I believe, that's already developed, and the Army is asked, hey, well, how does the Air Force see their operations? So we kind of take and give at the same time. So going back to my actual chart, and I know I'm mainly skipping around some. The another point of this I like to say is synchronization with not just the Air Force. My touch points while here is primarily with the 505th, Aegis H, which is the Army Joint Support Team, Herbert Phil, who works with the 505th, and also being a conduit with the Army Air Force Integration Forum, who actually is a group of individuals between TRADOC, FORCECOM, and ACC. There's a lot of information that comes out of a lot of these outstations. That information is shot back up to our CAD, and CAD develops, like I said, the most concise information using the most current lessons learned technology, combines it together. And I would like to say that we do a pretty good job with trying to get that information out to the force, as well as getting it out to our sister services. Any questions, comments, or concerns? I know that was brief and kind of sporadic and all over the place, but if you have any questions, comments, concern, I will look through the chat to see if that's available, but I'll also be on as well to answer anything pending. That concludes. Hello?
Oh, no, I was waiting to see if there were any questions.
Okay, Major Justin Cunningham.
So
My
Bob,
bad.
That's not the first time that's happened. Just know that I get called Jason more often than I get called Justin. So you're in a tight knit of individuals who've worked that through. So without
Our
further-
space guy.
Good morning, good afternoon, Major Justin Cunningham. I am the Space Force Liaison here at the LeMay Center, as well as the Doctrine Division Chief for Space. Again, very much like the Colonel pointed out, I'm not going to read this slide at this point in time, but I need you to understand that my connection point here is directly organic to the LeMay Center. I don't have a report element, but I have coordination and cross elements specifically with the Space Force. So with that, I want to caveat and convey specifically that Delta 10 is the organization for the CSO and the USSF to execute, develop, update, and finally implement doctrine. I am just the conduit here for them to work to and through that from a USAF perspective. Bottom line is I take the good work done by Delta 10 and Delta 13, which is also the educational function here at AU, to connect their capabilities to and through Air University, as well as efforts within the LeMay Center itself. So the doctrine that is focusing specifically on space equities, I make sure that is coordinated and properly disseminated through all points of LeMay. And then if there are questions throughout Air University or the field, and they are can be properly identified or caught as a low-hanging fruit on this side, I'll answer those. However, if there's something that is impacting DAF functions, or then would potentially impact those that are Delta 10's developments or capabilities they have, my intention and what I do here is connect directly to a team provided me from Delta 10. For all intents and purposes, my time here has been fantastic working with both Delta 10 and LeMay. The team on that side is doing a lot of great work, and I'm very impressed with what they've done in the past calendar year for development of structures for new doctrine items, doctrine notes, working groups. The team in general has been phenomenal to work with, and this is more for you, Colonel Davidson, that the connection and function for this liaison position has been paramount and exceptional as far as my capabilities are concerned. One thing you see at the bottom here is there's connections to the 505th, as well as the Colonel mentioned, being a graduate from their C2 Wars Advanced course. We've been also funneling information from the perspective of space capabilities to that organization, which as they develop their AOC specific courses for JADO and JAD C2, I'm making sure that all the space information is properly promulgated. Other than that, there's been again a lot of work done by Delta 10 that's been again funneled into and through the USAF side here. And subsequently, if there's a USAF item or doctrine development effort that needs space functions or space adjustments, have been brought into those as well. So as far as the DAF is concerned, again, this position has been phenomenal, and I have to make sure that we have proper connection between the sister services. That is my soapbox. Is there any questions specifically related to space? All right, thank you for your time.
We'll turn it over to our civilian deputy director, Mr. Chris Blunt, to talk about the staff turnover. The folks here at LeMay you'll be dealing with, or in some cases, no longer dealing with in the future.
Hey, everyone, Chris Blunt here, the new Deputy Director of Doctrine. I've been here for quite some time. Just wanted to point out some new personnel, outbound personnel on the military side. All of our civilian personnel are still the same, but we do have some coming up that are retiring. I do want to make one note. Mr. Robert Banberg, who was our civilian Deputy Director, has passed away last month. So if he was your touch point, he is no longer with us, and I now fill that spot. On the new personnel side, Colonel Davidson, obviously he talked this morning and is our new director. You've heard from some of the other personnel, which again, just wanted to hit a quick note. We got Mr. Scott Morrison, doctor analyst. He's our newest civilian. He goes by Chevy. He works mostly on the service side. And then some of the people on outbound, we do have our Bob 3 leaving here. I think he's got 120 days left. We get regular countdowns from him. And then Mr. Mike Simpkins will be following him shortly after that. And then you see some of the military that are most of these, except for Scott Major Doller and Lieutenant Colonel Knepp, are still with us, but they will be slowly moving out. Yeah, and Major Cunningham was also leaving us this summer. So I just wanted to give you some names of new personnel that you can reach out to specifically with direct questions. That's all I have. Any questions?
since we are in a marvelously accelerated rate, I recommend we simply skip a break and we can go ahead and power through the briefing and give you all back some time this afternoon. So unless we hear wailing and gnashing of teeth from the field about not taking a break, we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, we will now head into the hot topics. There are three of them that we wanted to make you aware of that are currently dealing with and will be dealing with for some time to come. And the first couple, I will turn it over to Major Mark Bartak, who is intimately involved in both of these.
Good morning, afternoon, Major Bartok, Special Operations Branch Chief for Doctrine Service. So the Air Force Doctrine Writing Committee, this is going to take place the end of March to go over what we'll talk about in more detail, the Mission Command Doctrine Note. We'll go over the background and purpose for all that, but pretty much the need to know about that is on 1 March, we will be releasing outside of the building, the author's draft for everybody to take a look at, to read through, to tear apart, bring readings to the conference to be able to ensure that we have all the subject matter experts in the room to make sure we get this doctrine note right. The second note up there is the AFDP 3-TAC-2 era of warfare. As of this week, the decision is to rescind that publication and to disperse it into other Air Force doctrine publications. So expect to see that publication be removed here within the next month or so. And then the contents of it will be placed into other publications as they come up for rewrite. So irregular warfare will no longer be an Air Force doctrine publication. And then we talked about earlier AFDP 313 information and Air Force operations. And basically it has solidified the Air Force position on defining what information warfare actually means and entails. So if you work in information and Air Force operations, I would advise taking a few minutes to read the publication. It's not long. I think it's 44 pages, but it's a very good read. If any questions on the doctrine hot topics, we can move into everyone's favorite topic of Mission Command.
Hey, Mark, this is Mr. Brooks. Just a couple add-ons on information warfare.
Go ahead.
All right, so for those who are out in the field, as the AO for 313, some things that have come up. Yes, the Air Force has officially defined information warfare, and if you look in the document, it lays it out as a set of Air Force capabilities. What we have not done is we have not gotten the Joint Force to agree that information warfare is a thing. For those who actually will look in JP 304, you're going to find the blue box in there that says that the Joint Service does not officially recognize information warfare as a form of warfare. So I want the field to remember, we haven't solved that particular problem. We've won our battle about defining it as a service term, but in the joint environment, IW still refers to irregular warfare. And we at the joint level are going to say there's traditional and irregular warfare. So the Air Force has taken its first steps in moving information warfare into the greater realm of conversation. But I thought it was very important to let everybody know the Joint Force has not adopted information warfare or even the concept of information warfare. We're still very much in the early stages of the Air Force building it out. There are other services who also use the term, but for us, we have laid out what it means. We do not have policy. We do not have an overarching AFI. We don't even really have the funding sources set out yet to say that we're doing information warfare. So from the doctrine standpoint, just important to know, we've got our definition, we've got our way forward, but that's where we stand today. Thanks.
Pending any questions, which we'll be more than happy to take any time, we'll turn it back over to Mark for a discussion on the upcoming circumstances regarding Mission Command.
Okay, for the Mission Command update, I'll go through the short particulars on it and then open up for questions because I'm sure there are a plethora of them out there. So the background on why we are doing this Air Force Doctrine Note. So with the release in 21 of the AFDP-1, the Air Force, the definition for Mission Command and the concept was introduced out to the Air Force. So out of that has become a bunch of questions, a bunch of need for further examination and more explanation onto Mission Command. So we have been directed to expand on AFDP-1 and provide a doctrine note that provides more detail and analysis on Mission Command as it applies to the Air Force. Mission Command is referenced in Joint Publication 3.0 and is referenced throughout other entities. The Army and Marine Corps have Mission Command. The reason that we are writing the doctrine note is we are writing Mission Command from the airman's perspective. As Bob 3 hit on earlier, everything that we do within doctrine publications is written from the operational level, from the airman's perspective. Due to the nature of the Air Force, we have to take into account the scope and speciality of airmen, how to apply Mission Command across the force. So what we are doing is we are currently writing the author's draft internal to the LeMay Center. It's at its current version, a 24-page document expanding on roughly 6 paragraphs out of AFDP-1. The current content is broken into 3 separate chapters, where basically we explain the history and the background of where Mission Command comes from and how it applies to the Air Force. We expand on the principles of Mission Command, and then we look at Mission Command in application or in action is the word we're using in this point. The thing to note, and we've kind of hit on it a lot here, is a doctrine note is in between a doctrine publication and emerging concepts. It's not quite this is how it's going to be. This is a concept that we are employing that needs to be expanded on. So this doctrine note is not meant to be the end all be all. It is meant to be a primer to have the force expand on and experiment and figure out the how to employ. This is providing the why we are using Mission Command. So with that, there's already been an initial AFDD calling message released by the end of this week, aka tomorrow. You'll see another email from me, which is the 30-day calling message, which is providing the time, location, and everything you need to know about getting to Maxwell Air Force Base for the writing committee. Big note on this one is we are not funding this. This is unit funded, and there is not going to be a virtual option. The reason for the virtual option, not doing a virtual option, is the fact that it's more productive having everyone in the room and being able to have lively discussions, and having a virtual option kind of detracts a little bit from the actual making of the publication. So as I said earlier, we will be releasing the author's draft on 1 March, giving you roughly 27 days to review it and bring your inputs to the AFDD, which will be the 28th through the 30th March coming up here. The importance of this, Lieutenant General Schleich, the HAP A3 is coming to give the opening remarks. That's how important this is to the Air Force, and we'll also be bringing our components from the Army and Marine Corps as well. One of the things that you will see there is that we have purposely left the vignettes in the author's draft blank. We've given left and right limits on them, but we want you to bring your experience of how you see Mission Command applied in the Air Force, so that you as the experts can bring the examples, as opposed to myself trying to come up with something that only makes sense to my AFSC. And then once we complete the AFDD, we'll start the normal field review, or the CRM to the field, so it'll go back out. Note, if you can slide to the next page. This is an extremely accelerated timeline. Normally, to do a publication from initial concept through final staffing is 9 months. We are going to do this entire process in roughly 25 weeks with the intent, as you can see from the POAM, having the CSAF sign this by the middle of July. So when we push out information on Mission Command, it's one of those that if you want your inputs taken, it needs to be done quick, fast, and in a hurry. We really don't have the time to sit on this and really mull it over to make it as fine-tuned and sharp as we would a normal publication. But the reason for that is that this is getting this out to the force so that the force can have a common operating picture, a common lexicon to expand and create the actual library of content that is needed for Mission Command in the Air Force. With that, I'll get off my soapbox and open up to questions, which I'm sure there are quite a few. Now. And if nobody has questions right now, you can reach out to me via Par Direct. Last name is Bartok. I'm the only one in the Air Force, so for better or worse, I'm really, really easy to find.
Colonel Davison was called away to a staff meeting with the general, so for closeout remarks, we'll turn it over to our Deputy Director, Chris Blunt.
Before we, oh, that's Casey answering something. Casey, what's your response to, is that still to the previous question or is that something to Bartak?
No, that is to Major Burchi's question. I just hadn't finished giving her enough, what I thought was enough background. So just saying that everybody's paving the evolution of information warfare, but as a third type of warfare, the Joint Force, what we gather from the discussions 3 to 4 years ago is that the Joint Force was not yet organized, trained, or equipped to actually conduct this on a large scale. So that's why we're still in the negotiation phase.
Okay, sorry.
All right, Chris Blunt here. I just want to thank everybody for showing up. We really should be doing these things a little bit more often, and we'll try to look to do these twice a year. We're really looking just to get the message out there, how we work doctrine, all the things involved and how we coordinate can be quite time consuming. However, it is important that we get it right and educate the Air Force on how we do it, so it's more understandable. Pending that, if anyone has any questions, you can hit us up, send us emails. We have a couple workflow email addresses for service. We have workflow email addresses for joint. We can send those out if you don't already have a copy of them. But pending any questions, that's all we have.
Thanks, everybody, for your participation and for your patience. And we are more than happy to give you back some of your time, valuable as it is. So unless there are any further questions, the LeMay Center will sign out here.
I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Cool. 7:24.
Not bad.
We had this boat for 4 hours.
We didn't know going into Asking that question.
Up here. Yeah.
Oh, reference to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Going back to the advantage. Information.
So
That's what you.
do we need to leave this? While they're still talking?